So in question H2, you're given this just plot of data points that relate the population of a country in millions of people to the number of million tons of carbon dioxide produced by the emissions in that country. And so I asked the H2 groups to fit a line of best fit by hand to this data and then to estimate the slope. And this group over here estimated the slope to be about 0.0625. The units of that would be, where did you get your units from, by the way? The units of a slope are always the ratio of the vertical units to the horizontal units, so millions of tons of carbon dioxide per millions of people. But my question to all of you before we leave today is, tell me what's wrong with the sentence that I wrote down at the bottom. For every million people that there are in a country, 0.0625 million tons of CO2 is produced. I'm claiming that that's a flawed interpretation of the slope. How come? What's wrong with that sentence? Phoebe?
Do you have to add the intercept because that's how much is actually produced?
Right. So we're neglecting the intercept in this sentence. Because after all, what does this sentence say to a casual reader of the New York Times? A casual reader of the New York Times is going to look at the sentence and say, well, okay, then this would mean that a country with 1 million people would produce how much? CO2. 1 million people will produce 0.0625 million tons of CO2. But clearly that's not right. According to this graph, about how much CO2 does a country with 1 million people produce? Somewhere up here, right? Somewhere between 5 and 6 million tons. So, as Phoebe says, we're neglecting the intercept. If we just say for every million people produce this many million tons of CO2, we're missing the fact that, and the intercept here, what did you estimate the intercept to be, your group?
5.5.
5.5. And what does that intercept mean? First of all, what is its units? And what's the interpretation of that intercept?
That's how much is naturally produced without any human influence.
Right. This is, I mean, you might interpret this to be, I mean, mathematically, this is the amount of CO2 produced by a country with no population. By zero population. So as Phoebe says, we might just consider this to be the sort of baseline level of CO2 that's produced naturally by, without any human causes, or at least without any human population in this. And so in order to fix this sentence, for every million people there is 0.625 million tons of CO2 produced. Zero people, sorry. Let me fix that. There's a couple ways I could fix this sentence. The first is the way that we did it earlier today, just by adding the word additional. Because after all, a slope is not a statement about absolute numbers. A slope is a statement about changes, differences. So for every million people that I add to my population, I'm going to add 0.0625 million tons of CO2. So you need that word additional in your statements about slope. Otherwise, you might not have the relationship that you're looking for. Another way to do it is to just add that intercept at the end of the sentence that we wrote up here. A country will produce 1 million people per 0.0625 million tons of CO2 plus an additional 5.5 million or something like that. So be careful about translating slopes into sentences. Always include those words additional to make sure that we understand a slope is a relationship between changes, not a relationship between amounts. A relationship between differences and not a relationship between absolute numbers.